Marcus Cole had exactly 900 credits to his name, and a landlord who wanted 800 of them by Friday. That was the only reason he dragged himself out of bed on a Tuesday morning on Callows 9, pulled on his grease-stained jacket, and checked the salvage listings one more time before heading down to the docks. The notification had been sitting in his inbox for 3 days, blinking orange like a warning light nobody cared about. Mandatory liquidation, 1 vessel, classification pending, origin unverified, orbital depot 7 Callows 9 upper ring, minimum bid 800 galactic credits. No specs, no images, no species of origin, no size class, nothing. That kind of listing usually meant one thing: junk nobody wanted to deal with. Something so broken or so legally tangled that even the scrap dealers stayed away. Marcus had been in the salvage business for 6 years, ever since he left the Union Navy with a bad knee, a worse attitude, and enough sense to know better than to chase blind listings. But he also knew that rent was due and his cargo bay was empty. And if he didn't find something to sell soon, he'd be sleeping in that cargo bay instead of working in it. The shuttle ride up to the orbital depot took 40 minutes. Marcus spent most of it staring out the window at the brown and gray surface of Callows 9 below, wondering how his life had ended up on a world even the xeno-traders called the armpit of council space. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for 60 years now. In that time, humans had spread across a few dozen worlds, built a modest fleet, established trade routes, and earned themselves a reputation as a juvenile species, which was the polite way the elder races said sit down and be quiet while the adults are talking. Marcus didn't care much about galactic politics, but he felt the weight of that label every time a Torai merchant looked through him like he was furniture, or a Vallacy customs officer made him fill out triple the paperwork because his species lacked established commercial credibility. He just wanted to make a living. Orbital Depot 7 was old and mostly abandoned, a ring of rusted docking cradles and cargo bays spinning slowly above the planet like a forgotten wheel. When Marcus stepped off the shuttle into the main concourse, the silence hit him first. There was nobody here, not a single dealer, not a single bidder, not even the usual crowd of scavengers and onlookers who showed up to every auction hoping to grab something cheap. Just empty halls, flickering lights, and the tired hum of life support systems. He found the auction room at the end of a long corridor, a small chamber with plastic chairs in crooked rows and a podium at the front. Behind the podium stood a single Vallacy bureaucrat, 4 arms, pale blue skin, and an expression that suggested he would rather be literally anywhere else in the galaxy. The Vallacy looked up when Marcus walked in, and his 4 eyes blinked in sequence, which Marcus had learned was the Vallacy equivalent of genuine surprise. "You are here for the auction?" the bureaucrat asked. "Unless there's another reason to visit this place," Marcus said, looking around at the empty chairs. "There is not." The Vallacy admitted it with something almost like gratitude. "I have been assigned to conduct this auction for 3 cycles now, and no one has attended. If no one purchases this vessel today, I will have to file yet another extension form with the Revenue Authority, and I cannot endure another extension form." "Sounds like we can help each other," Marcus said, dropping into the front row. The auction lasted exactly 90 seconds. The Vallacy read the listing aloud in a flat monotone: 1 unit, seized for non-payment of docking fees and accumulated fines, species of origin unknown, condition unassessed, and open bidding at 800 credits. Marcus raised his hand. 800. The Vallacy looked around the empty room with theatrical hope, waited the legally required 15 seconds for counterbids, and then slammed his authorization pad against the podium. Sold to the human. Marcus could have sworn the bureaucrat almost smiled. The paperwork took longer than the auction itself. While Marcus signed transfer documents and ownership codes, The Vallacy leaned in close and lowered his voice. A word of caution. This vessel has been flagged in 3 systems. No registered dealer in council space would bid on it. And I am required to tell you that the Revenue Authority assumes no liability for whatever you find aboard. Flagged for what? Unknown origin. The Vallacy's voice dropped further. The vessel appeared in this system 14 years ago with no crew, no flight plan, no transponder signal, and no record in any database anywhere. Every agency that examined it concluded the same thing. It does not match any known species shipbuilding methods. And then they stopped returning my messages. Something cold moved through Marcus's chest. He signed the last document anyway. 800 credits was 800 credits, and he could always strip it for parts. The Vallacy led him through a series of access corridors and freight tunnels, deep into the depot's outer ring. With every step the station felt older, quieter, more forgotten. Then they reached docking cradle 19, and the Vallacy released the observation shutter, and Marcus saw the ship for the first time. He stopped walking. It was enormous. Not big the way a freighter is big, or a cruiser is big. This was a completely different scale, stretching the full length of the viewport, and beyond it on both sides, a dark shape that seemed to drink the starlight around it. The hull was covered in smooth, flowing curves that looked almost grown rather than built, and the surface was a deep iridescent black that shifted between purple and blue and green as the station's lights played across it. Strange markings ran along the hull in patterns too regular to be damage and too complex to be decoration. Some language or notation system Marcus had never seen in any database, textbook, or merchant catalog. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," the Vallacy said flatly, "is your problem now." He handed Marcus the access codes, wished him questionable luck, and walked away quickly enough that his footsteps echoed long after he disappeared. Marcus stood there for a while, just looking. Then he took a breath, entered the codes into the docking cradle console, and walked down the umbilical corridor toward the nearest hull breach, a gap in the lower aft section where a maintenance panel had fallen away, leaving an opening just wide enough for a human. He ducked inside, and every light on the ship came on. Not all at once. It was more like a wave starting right where he stood and rolling outward in every direction, racing down corridors and up through decks and across vast chambers he couldn't yet see. A cascade of soft white-blue light that flooded the entire vessel in the span of a single heartbeat. The ship hummed. Not the mechanical hum of engines or generators, this was deeper, resonant, alive, like the ship itself had just taken a breath after holding it for a very long time. Marcus stood in the glow of lights that hadn't shone in centuries, aboard a ship that shouldn't exist, surrounded by a silence that felt less like emptiness and more like anticipation. And somewhere deep in the vessel, something whispered a word he almost understood. Marcus spent the first 3 days alone on the ship, and every hour made him more certain he'd stumbled into something never meant for a salvage dealer from Kalos 9. The interior was unlike anything he'd seen or read about or imagined. Corridors curved gently upward and then somehow became level again, with no transition he could feel in his legs or his stomach. Some rooms had gravity that pulled toward the ceiling, and when he stepped into them, his body simply adjusted, as if the floor had always been overhead. The walls were lined with crystalline structures that pulsed faintly when he passed, and the light followed him, always keeping him at the center of a soft glow that moved when he moved and dimmed when he stood still. Everything responded to him. Doors opened before he reached them, panels lit at his touch. When he came near, the temperature in every room settled to exactly the level that felt right against his skin. On the second day, he found the bridge, a vast circular chamber at the heart of the ship, crowned with a dome that displayed what he first took for a window and quickly realized was a projection. A perfect, real-time image of the stars outside, so sharp he felt like he was floating in open space. Consoles ringed the room, and when Marcus approached the central platform, they activated one by one, rising from the floor in smooth columns of dark metal and crystal. He touched one. The symbols rearranged themselves, cycling through what looked like dozens of writing systems, angular blocks, flowing curves, geometric patterns, dots and dashes, before finally settling on English. Keeper detected. Vessel systems initializing. Vessel, Marcus said aloud. The ship answered. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls and the floor and the air itself, speaking English with a strange cadence, as if assembling each word from memory and setting it carefully in place. I am Vessel. I am the operational intelligence of this craft, and I have been waiting for you. Marcus felt his heartbeat in his throat. Waiting for me, specifically. Waiting for your kind, for a human. Though I did not know what you would call yourselves when you finally arrived. Over the next several hours, Vessel spoke and Marcus listened. The story it told was so vast and so old that he had to sit down on the deck and just breathe more than once. The ship had been built by a species called the Anthari, who had existed over 2 million years ago, long before any civilization now in the Galactic conquered had begun to crawl out of its oceans, descend from its trees, or crystallize from its mineral pools. The Anthari were the first intelligent species in the galaxy, the first to look up at the stars and wonder, the first to build ships and cross the void, the first to ask the question every thinking creature eventually asks, are we alone? They searched for millions of years and found no one. The galaxy was empty, and the silence nearly broke them. So they decided to fill it. Vessel explained that the Anthari had learned to engineer the conditions for intelligent life on other worlds, not by creating species directly, but by seeding planets with the right biological foundation and then guiding evolution across millions of years through subtle environmental adjustments. They seeded thousands of worlds. Over vast stretches of time, those seeds grew into the species that now filled Council space. The Valisi, the Tauri, the Shaith, the Drexi, hundreds of others. Each one the distant descendant of an Anthari design. Every species in the galaxy exists because the Anthari wanted them to exist, Vessel said, its voice carrying something Marcus could only call sadness. But there was more. The Anthari hadn't seeded life at random. Each species was designed to carry something, a fragment of Anthari knowledge, embedded deep in their biology, their instincts, the very patterns of their thought. The Valisi carried an intuition for governance and organization that echoed the Anthari's political philosophy. The Tauri carried a deep understanding of patience and long-term planning that mirrored their approach to cosmic engineering. The Shaith carried a fierce protective drive that reflected the Anthari's commitment to defending what they had built. Every species held a piece of the puzzle, but no single species held enough to see the whole picture. And humans? Marcus asked, because he already felt the answer forming in his chest like a weight. Humans were the last species seeded, Vessel said. You are the capstone. Marcus shook his head slowly. What does that mean? It means the Anthari encoded in your species the ability to integrate all the fragments. Every other species carries a piece of knowledge. Humans carry the ability to receive those pieces, connect them, and see the whole. That is why this ship responds to you and to no one else. It was designed to wait for the capstone species, and to activate only when they arrived. Marcus sat in silence for a long time. He was not a scientist or a diplomat or a philosopher. He was painfully aware he was just a guy who fixed engines and sold scrap metal. The idea that his entire species had been designed for some grand cosmic purpose felt absurd and terrifying and impossible, all at once. But the ship was real. It responded to him, and Vessel had no reason to lie. On the fourth day, Marcus contacted the only person in the galaxy he trusted. Safka was a Drexi, a species that resembled what humans might call a bipedal lizard, though Marcus had learned never to say that out loud. She ran a small trading operation out of Kalos 9's lower docks. She and Marcus had been friends for 3 years, bound by the kind of loyalty that forms between people who are both too stubborn to leave a bad situation and too broke to go anywhere else. He told her everything over a secure channel. The silence on her end lasted so long he thought the connection had dropped. "You're telling me," Safka finally said, her voice carrying the low rumble Drexy used when they were either very angry or very scared, "that you bought the single most important object in the history of the galaxy for 800 credits. That's what I'm telling you. And you need me to bring you food and supplies, because you've been living on emergency rations inside an alien relic for 4 days. That's also what I'm telling you." Safka arrived 6 hours later with 2 weeks of provisions, a portable water recycler, and a look that suggested she was seriously reconsidering their friendship. But she stayed because that was who Safka was. Together they explored more of the ship, and Vessel guided them through chambers and systems that made even Safka, who'd seen more of the galaxy than Marcus ever would, go quiet with wonder. Then, on the 5th day, Vessel said something that changed everything. "Keeper," it said, its voice carrying a tone he hadn't heard before, something close to urgency. "I must inform you of a critical matter." "Go ahead." "When you first boarded this vessel and activated my systems, an automatic signal was broadcast, on a frequency I was designed to transmit upon the arrival of a keeper. This signal has been broadcasting continuously for 5 days, and it has been received." Marcus felt the cold again, the same cold from the observation window. Received by whom? By everyone. The signal has reached Council relay networks. It has been detected by monitoring stations across 3 sectors, and I am reading multiple ship signatures converging on this system. Marcus looked at Safka. Safka looked at Marcus. Neither of them said anything because neither of them needed to. Someone was coming, a lot of someones, and Marcus had the feeling that not all of them were coming to talk. He watched them arrive from the bridge of the ship he'd started calling the Inheritance, their signatures blooming across Vessel's holographic display like sparks catching on dry wood. 2 at first, then 5, then 12. Then too many to count without scrolling. Conquered enforcement vessels came first, sleek gray warships bearing the triple circle emblem of the Galactic Council. They took up positions around the orbital depot in a formation Marcus recognized from his Navy days, a containment pattern. Then came the private ships, merchant cruisers, diplomatic yachts, research vessels from a dozen species, all converging on the Kalos system like they'd heard a dinner bell ring across the stars. The High Council wasted no time. Within hours, Marcus received an official transmission from the Council chambers on the capital world of Thesson Prime, delivered in the clipped, formal tone of someone reading from a legal document they expected obeyed without question. The vessel Marcus called the Inheritance had been classified as a precursor artifact under Section 44 of the Conquered Salvage and Heritage Act. All precursor artifacts, any technology predating the formation of the Conquered, were the collective property of all member species, and therefore fell under the direct authority of the High Council. Marcus was ordered to surrender the vessel immediately, vacate the premises, and submit to a formal debriefing. He read the message twice, then looked at Safka, who was sitting cross-legged on the bridge floor eating dried meat from a foil packet. "They want the ship." "Of course they do," Safka said. "They're citing salvage law." "Of course they are." Marcus thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Then he opened a reply channel. "No." The word traveled across space at the speed of light and landed on the desks of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, with all the diplomatic grace of a brick through a window. What followed was chaos. The Council sent a boarding team, 12 Tauri soldiers in full combat armor, accompanied by a Valisi legal officer carrying enough paperwork to fill a cargo container. They docked, crossed the umbilical, and approached the hull breach where Marcus had first entered. The moment the first boot touched the threshold, every bulkhead in the forward section slammed shut with a sound like thunder. The docking clamps disengaged themselves. The entire ship went dark, except for the section where Marcus and Safka stood. The boarding team was left in a sealed corridor, unable to move forward or back, until Vessel calmly rerouted them to the umbilical and sealed the breach behind them. The vessel does not accept unauthorized personnel, it announced on an open channel, and Marcus imagined he could hear something like satisfaction in the words. The council was furious, but the real crisis wasn't about law or property. It was about what Vessel's broadcast had implied, and what was now spreading through every news network and diplomatic channel in the galaxy. The idea that humanity was the capstone species, designed by the Anthari to integrate the knowledge of every other civilization. It struck at the very foundation of the galactic order. The Conquered was built on a hierarchy, and that hierarchy rested on a simple assumption: older species were wiser, more advanced, more fit to lead, and younger species should defer until they'd proven themselves over centuries. The three elder species, the Valisi, the Tauri, and the Shaith, had held the top position since the Conquered began, and their authority rested on the unspoken belief that seniority was the natural measure of worth. But if the Anthari had designed every species for a specific purpose, and if humanity, one of the youngest, had been made the keystone that held everything together, then the entire hierarchy wasn't just wrong. It was actively working against the galaxy's intended design. This terrified the elder species in a way no military threat ever could. The council dispatched its best negotiator. Ambassador Keth Voron was Tauri, 8 feet tall, covered in thick gray hide, with a face that looked carved from stone by someone who didn't believe in smiling. He was over 400 years old, had negotiated the end of 3 interstellar conflicts, and was widely considered the most dangerous diplomat in the galaxy, not because he was aggressive, but because he had the patience to wait for exactly the right moment to say exactly the right thing. Voron arrived aboard a diplomatic cruiser and requested a meeting through a channel so polite and carefully worded that even Safka admitted it was impressive. Marcus agreed to speak, though he refused to leave the ship. They talked through a comm channel, Marcus on the bridge, Voron in the depot's conference room, for 3 hours. Voron offered him everything: wealth beyond imagination, a permanent seat on the council's advisory board, full citizenship rights for humanity, elevated to elder species status, research access to the greatest libraries in the Conquered. All Marcus had to do was allow a council team aboard to secure the artifact and let the proper authorities handle the dissemination of whatever it contained. "You are a reasonable man," Voron said, his voice warm and steady and almost fatherly. "You understand that something this significant cannot be left in the hands of one person. I am offering you a partnership that would benefit your entire species." Marcus listened to every word and heard what Voron wasn't saying. He wasn't offering partnership. He was offering a comfortable cage, a way to control the narrative, a method of burying the truth under layers of committees and review boards and classified programs until the galaxy forgot that a broke salvage dealer had once found something proving the old order was built on a lie. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said, "but the ship won't let you aboard, and I'm not going to pretend that's my decision to override." Voron's expression didn't change, but there was a long pause that said more than words could. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening across the galaxy. The younger species, the ones told for centuries to wait their turn, defer to their elders, accept that their place was fixed and earned through patience, were paying attention. News of the Anthari legacy spread through networks and forums and underground channels faster than any government could suppress it, and the response was electric. If every species had been designed with purpose, the old ranking system was meaningless. The younger species weren't lesser. They were simply different pieces of the same vast design. Support began pouring in, from worlds Marcus had never heard of, from species he couldn't pronounce, from individuals and entire planetary governments who saw in his discovery a chance to reshape the galaxy into something fairer. But not everyone was sending messages of support. Safka came to Marcus on the 9th day with blood on her jacket, and a look in her eyes he'd never seen before, a look that said she was afraid and didn't want to be. "Someone tried to grab me at the lower docks," she said, her voice steady, her hands not. 3 of them, masked. No species markings, professional. They wanted the ship's access codes and the location of vessel's core systems. "Are you hurt?" "They're hurt, Drexy, don't go quietly," she swallowed. "But Marcus, these weren't criminals or pirates. These were trained operatives, and I think I know who sent them." She didn't need to say the name. The Shaith were the most militaristic of the 3 elder species, a proud warrior culture built around strength, dominance, and the belief that power was earned through force. If the Vallacy response was legal pressure and the Torai response was diplomatic manipulation, the Shaith response was going to be direct. Vessel confirmed it 3 hours later. "I am detecting a fleet formation assembling at the edge of this system. 47 vessels, Shaith military configuration, including 4 capital-class warships." Marcus closed his eyes. "How long before they arrive?" 16 hours at current speed." He opened his eyes and looked at Safka, who was already checking her sidearm. "Vessel," Marcus said, "you mentioned an archive. The full Anthari legacy, the reason this ship was built." "That is correct, Keeper. You said it can only be unlocked at a specific location." "The cradle, the world where the Anthari first evolved, where they built their final and greatest structure before they ended themselves. The coordinates are stored in my navigation systems. I have been holding them for 2 million years." "How far?" "Beyond the borders of all known civilization, deep in uncharted space." Marcus looked at the display showing 47 warships closing in. Then he looked at Safka. Then he took a breath. "Then I guess we need to leave." And for the first time in 2 million years, Vessel's engines began to hum. When the engines came to life, the entire ship seemed to exhale, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through every deck and settled into Marcus's bones like music played at a frequency just below hearing. The Inheritance pulled away from Orbital Depot 7 with a grace that should have been impossible for something over a kilometer long, sliding out of the docking cradle like a blade drawn from a sheath. The conquered enforcement vessels scrambled to respond, but they were too slow and too stunned to do anything but watch. Marcus had expected to run alone. He was wrong. Within hours, signals began arriving from across the Kalos system. Small ships, civilian vessels, traders, independents. A handful of military craft from younger species worlds that had been watching from a distance and had already made their decision. A Drexy gunship captained by one of Safka's cousins was the first to fall in alongside the Inheritance. Then a pair of fast corvettes crewed by Manari, a young species of 6-limbed engineers denied council representation for 50 years despite technology that rivaled the Elders. Then a Pellan science vessel, a Kafari patrol boat, a dozen other ships of every size and species, all converging on the same heading, all answering the same unspoken call. But the biggest surprise came from inside the Concord itself. Unidentified vessel. This is Captain Anara Dish of the Concord enforcement ship Resolute. I am breaking formation to join your convoy. The transmission came on an open channel, which meant every ship in the system heard it, which meant Anara Dish knew exactly what she was doing. She was burning her career, her rank, and her standing in full public view. Marcus opened a channel to her. "Captain, are you sure about this?" I have served the conquered for 90 years, Anara said, calm in the way that only comes from having already made peace with a decision. I have always believed the conquered existed to serve all species equally, but I have watched the Council suppress information, threaten a civilian, and prepare military force to protect a hierarchy I now believe was never meant to exist. So yes, I'm sure. She brought her ship, a mid-sized cruiser with real weapons and real armor, into formation beside the Inheritance, and her presence gave the ragtag fleet something it hadn't had before: legitimacy. They weren't rebels or pirates. They were citizens of the conquered, exercising their right to seek the truth. The fleet made 3 jumps before they hit the border. The edge of known civilization wasn't a wall or a line, it was a gradual thinning, a place where the star maps went from detailed to sparse to blank. The relay station stopped. The navigation beacons went dark. The only thing ahead was the unknown. The Shaith fleet caught them there. War Commander Osrin brought 47 ships out of hyperspace in a wall of metal and fire that stretched across the void like a clenched fist. Capital warships flanked by destroyers and interceptors, every weapon powered, every shield raised. Osrin himself appeared on the comm, a broad, scarred Shaith with a voice like gravel being crushed, wearing the ceremonial armor of a fleet commander who had seen more battles than most species had seen generations. Human. The word wasn't an insult, but it wasn't friendly either. I am going to speak plainly because I respect you enough not to waste your time with politics. I appreciate that, Marcus said. I do not care about the Council's laws, or the hierarchy, or who sits in what chair on Thesson Prime. What I care about is the survival of every civilization in this galaxy, and what you are carrying on that ship has the power to tear everything apart, or bring everything together. That's what frightens me too. There was something raw in Osrin's voice Marcus hadn't expected. Every great change in history has been paid for in blood. I have seen enough blood to last me forever. I will not stand aside and let you unleash something that could ignite a war across 1,000 worlds. Commander, I'm not trying to start a war. Then surrender the vessel and let us contain this. Not destroy it, contain it, study it. Release it slowly, over decades, in a way that does not shatter everything at once. Marcus understood Osrin's fear, and he respected it, because the war commander wasn't a villain. He was a soldier who had spent his life protecting people, and who saw in this moment the possibility of everything he'd protected falling apart. But Marcus also knew that truth doesn't become less true because you release it slowly. That controlling information is just another word for controlling people, and that 2 million years was long enough to wait. I can't do that, Marcus said, and I think you know I can't. Osrin closed the channel, and the Shaith fleet opened fire. The battle was the most terrifying and beautiful thing Marcus had ever witnessed. The ragtag fleet scattered into defensive positions, Anara Dish's Resolute leading the charge with a ferocity that surprised even the Shaith. The younger species ships fought with a desperation born not of aggression, but of the understanding that this was the moment where everything changed, or nothing did. But it was the Inheritance that turned the tide. Vessel activated weapon systems dormant for 2 million years, and the gap between Anthari engineering and modern conquered hardware wasn't a gap. It was an abyss. Beams of light that bent around obstacles and passed through shields like they weren't there. Gravity pulses that shoved capital ships sideways without damaging them. Energy fields that wrapped around incoming missiles and simply unmade them into harmless particles. Marcus didn't want to destroy the Shaith fleet, and he told Vessel so. The ship listened. Every shot it fired was precise, surgical, designed to disable rather than kill. Engines knocked offline. Weapon arrays overloaded and shut down. Navigation systems scrambled, but not a single hull breached. Not a single compartment depressurized. Not a single life taken. The Shaith had never encountered anything like it. Marcus could hear the confusion and fear in their communications as ship after ship went dark, but alive. And during the battle, as Marcus gripped the console and watched the chaos unfold, Vessel told him the last piece of the Anthari story. The Anthari did not die, it said, calm even as it coordinated 100 simultaneous defensive actions. They did not ascend to a higher plane or flee to another galaxy. They chose to end themselves. Why? Because they understood that a single dominant species, no matter how wise or benevolent, will always become a cage for everything beneath it. They looked at what they had built, a galaxy full of potential, full of life they had lovingly designed, and they realized that as long as they existed, every other species would live in their shadow, defined by their design, dependent on their guidance, so they stepped aside. They removed themselves entirely. They destroyed their cities, erased their presence from every world they had touched, and left behind only this ship, and the cradle to be found when the time was right. Marcus felt something break open inside him. Grief for a species he'd never known, a people who had loved the galaxy so much they gave it the only gift that mattered, the freedom to become whatever it wanted to be. And in that moment, standing on the bridge of a ship built by beings who had sacrificed everything for a future they'd never see, Marcus made a decision. Vessel, broadcast the Anthari historical records on every frequency you can reach. Every ship, every station, every world. Hold nothing back. Once this information is released, it cannot be contained, Keeper. I know that's the point. Vessel broadcast. The signal went out like a wave of light, carrying the Anthari's story, their creation, their seeding of the galaxy, their sacrifice, the purpose they had given every species. It washed over the battlefield and beyond it, reaching relay stations and comm networks, spreading at the speed of light toward every corner of civilization. The Shaith fleet went silent. Marcus watched Osran's flagship drift to a stop, its weapons powering down, and imagined the war commander in his command chair, receiving the same transmission every being in the galaxy was now receiving, the truth about where they all came from and why. Some of the Shaith ships stood down immediately, their captains unable to fight against something that had just given them the deepest answer their species had ever sought. Others held their positions, uncertain and afraid. In the gap that opened, Marcus and his fleet jumped to the final coordinates. When they emerged from hyperspace, Marcus looked through Vessel's display and forgot how to breathe. It wasn't a planet. It was a structure so vast it made the inheritance look like a grain of sand beside a mountain, hanging in the void, dark and silent and impossibly ancient. A web of interconnected rings and spheres and bridges that dwarfed anything any civilization had ever built. The cradle. As the inheritance approached, the structure began to light up section by section, ring by ring, a cascade of illumination spreading across something the size of a solar system, as if the greatest creation in the history of the galaxy had been holding its breath for 2 million years and had just exhaled. Not alive the way animals or plants are alive, but alive the way a cathedral is alive when light pours through its windows and fills the silence with color. Alive with purpose, with meaning, with the accumulated intention of a civilization that had poured everything it was into one final act of generosity. Marcus guided the ship through the outer rings, following a path Vessel traced through the display like a thread through a labyrinth. Every surface glowed with that same soft blue-white light. The scale was beyond comprehension, entire sections larger than planets, connected by bridges spanning millions of kilometers. Through the transparent walls of the passage corridors, Marcus could see chambers holding miniature suns in suspension, crystalline forests reaching into artificial skies, vast libraries where data conduits pulsed in patterns so complex they looked like galaxies. "What is all of this?" Safka whispered, her reptilian eyes wider than Marcus had ever seen them. Everything, Vessel said. The complete knowledge of the Anthari civilization. Their science, their art, their philosophy, their history, their music, their mathematics, their understanding of life and death in the universe. Stored, preserved, and waiting to be given away. Marcus docked the inheritance at the structure's core, a spherical chamber at the very center of the cradle, so perfectly still and silent it felt like standing inside a held breath. At its center was a single platform, raised slightly above the floor, ringed with crystalline conduits. "Keeper," Vessel said softly, "when you step onto that platform and interface with the central archive, the cradle will begin its primary function." Which is transmission. The cradle was designed to broadcast the Anthari legacy to every world in the galaxy simultaneously, but not as a single, undifferentiated signal. Each species will receive a targeted data stream, encoded in their own language, structured to match their own cognitive patterns, containing the specific knowledge they were designed to contribute and benefit from. Marcus stood at the edge of the platform and looked at it for a long time. He thought about his apartment on Kalos 9 that he probably couldn't afford anymore, about the 800 credits he'd spent on an auction no one else attended, about the fact that he was a mechanic and a salvage dealer, not a hero or a prophet or a leader. He thought about how absurd it was that the most important moment in the history of the galaxy was about to happen because one guy needed rent money. Then he stepped onto the platform. The light hit him like a wave. It surged up through the floor, into his body, out through the top of his head, and in that moment Marcus felt everything. Not just the Anthari's knowledge, but their intention, their love, their desperate hope that someday someone would stand exactly where he was standing and do exactly what he was doing. The cradle awoke. It happened all at once, a pulse of energy radiating outward from the core, through every ring and bridge and chamber, and then beyond, out into the void, accelerating to speeds that should have been impossible. A wave of information that crossed the galaxy not in years or centuries, but in moments. On 1,000 worlds, on 10,000 worlds, beings of every species looked up as their communication systems activated without warning and began receiving data. The Galaxy received political and organizational frameworks so elegant and so fair that their greatest scholars wept, systems of governance that balanced individual freedom with collective responsibility in ways they had spent millennia trying to achieve. The Tauri received ecological and environmental knowledge that revealed the deep connections between all living systems, patterns and principles that would let them heal damaged worlds and nurture new ones with a precision they'd only dreamed of. The Shaith received strategic and protective doctrines, not of conquest, but of guardianship, methods for defending life against threats internal and external, a warrior philosophy that honored strength while directing it toward preservation rather than domination. The Drexy received biological and medical knowledge that could end diseases their species had suffered for generations, insights into genetic repair and cellular regeneration Safka's people had been chasing since they first developed science. Every species received something specific, something tailored, something they needed. And humanity received the integration framework. It was not a weapon, or a crown, or a throne. It was a lens, a way of seeing how all the pieces fit together, an understanding of connection that let humans look at the knowledge given to every other species and see the patterns that linked them all. Marcus felt it settle into his mind like a key turning in a lock. And suddenly he could see it, the way the Galaxy gift of governance connected to the Tauri gift of ecological thinking, the way the Shaith gift of protection supported the Manari gift of engineering, the way every piece was part of a design so vast and so beautiful that no single species could ever have conceived it alone. Humans hadn't been given superiority, they'd been given responsibility. And the Anthari had chosen humanity as the capstone not because humans were the strongest, or smartest, or most advanced, but because of one trait the Anthari valued above every other quality in the universe: stubbornness. The irrational, defiant, beautiful refusal to accept that something is impossible. Across millions of years of observation, the Anthari had seen that humans possessed something unique: a capacity for dreaming beyond their reach, for attempting things logic said couldn't be done, for persisting in the face of every piece of evidence that they should stop. Only a species like that would actually make the journey to the cradle. Every other species would have calculated the odds and decided it wasn't worth the risk. But humans would do it anyway, not because they were certain of success, but because they couldn't bear the thought of not trying. Inheritance was not power, it was the willingness to carry the weight. Marcus opened his eyes. The light was still flowing, the cradle was still transmitting. And somewhere behind him, Safka was saying his name, but he couldn't answer yet because he was still holding all of it. The grief of the Anthari, the hope of the Anthari, their love for a galaxy they would never see completed. Then the alarm sounded. "Keeper," Vessel said, "the Shaith fleet has arrived at the cradle." 47 warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the structure, and War Commander Osran's flagship moved to the front of the formation. Weapons charged, shields raised, bearing down on the core with the full weight of a military built for exactly this kind of decisive action. Marcus stepped off the platform. The light receded, but the knowledge remained. He walked to the bridge with steady legs and a clear mind and opened a channel to Osran. "Commander." There was a long silence. When Osran spoke, his voice was different, not the gravel-hard tone of a warrior preparing for battle, but something quieter. Something that sounded like a man standing at the edge of everything he'd ever believed, watching it reshape itself. "I received the transmission," Osran said. "My entire fleet received it. I have spent the last hour reading what the Anthari left for the Shaith, and I do not know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything with it right now. I came here to destroy this structure." A pause. "I believed it was the right thing to do. I believed the galaxy wasn't ready, that the chaos would destroy more than it would save." "You were right." Osran fell silent, surprised. "The galaxy isn't ready," Marcus said. "And it never will be. That's the entire point. You don't wait until everything is perfect to do what's right, because perfection never comes. You just do it and you deal with the mess and you make it work because that's what living things do." Another long silence. "My species was given a gift," Osran said slowly. "A gift that tells us our purpose is to protect, not to control." "Yes. And you are asking me to start doing that right now. Even though everything in my training tells me the safest course is to destroy this place and contain the information." "I'm not asking you anything, Commander," Marcus said. "I'm telling you the information is already out there. It's already reached every world in the galaxy. Destroying the cradle won't change that. The only question left is whether you want to be part of what comes next, or the one who tried to stop it." The Shaith fleet held its position for 11 minutes. Then one by one, the weapon systems powered down. Osran's flagship lowered its shields. "I will need time," Osran said. "We all will." 6 months later, the galaxy was a different place. Not a better place. Not yet. Different in the way a house is different after you've torn down a wall and found a room you never knew existed, messy and full of dust and uncertain, but also full of possibility. The old hierarchy was collapsing slowly and loudly, and with all the grace of a building falling down a hill. The elder species struggled to adjust to a reality in which their authority was no longer assumed, but had to be earned. The conquered still existed, but it was being rebuilt from the ground up, reshaped by the knowledge the cradle had given every species, restructured around the understanding that each civilization had a unique and essential role, and that no one species could or should lead alone. Humanity found itself at the center of this new order, not as rulers or commanders, but as connectors, the ones who sat at every table and helped translate between species, not just in language, but in purpose, helping the Valisi understand why the Shaith needed to protect, helping the Torai understand why the Manari needed to build, helping everyone see the threads that linked their gifts together. It was exhausting and messy and frequently ridiculous work. Marcus was terrible at the political parts and only slightly better at the diplomatic ones. But he kept showing up, because that was what humans did. They named him the first steward of the cradle, a title he accepted with the same enthusiasm he'd once reserved for filing tax forms. Safka visited every few weeks, bringing supplies and news and the particular kind of blunt honesty only a true friend can deliver. "You know," she told him once, sitting on the bridge of the inheritance while the structure hummed around them like a living thing, "you're technically the most important human alive. I'm a guy who went to an auction because he needed rent money. And now you're responsible for the future of galactic civilization." I'm aware of the irony. Safka made the low, rumbling sound Drexy used when something was funny, but also true. The Anthari spent 2 million years designing a plan to unite the galaxy, she said. And the whole thing depended on someone being too stubborn to know they should have stayed home. Marcus looked out at the stars through the bridge display, at the vast and luminous structure surrounding them, at a galaxy that was stumbling and arguing and slowly learning to see itself as one connected whole. "Yeah," he said, "sounds about human." The galaxy had spent 2 million years waiting for someone too stubborn to know they should have stayed home. In the end, that was enough.